And that's part of why you'll never be able to write a perfect first draft. Even if you outline your story in advance or follow one of the popular plotting methods like Save the Cat or the hero's journey, there's a process of discovery that needs to happen with every story that you set out to write. And that's because stories unfold and grow within us. So they change, they evolve in our minds as we get to know them more. And every day that we sit down to work on our stories, we learn a little bit more about our characters, the plot, the world, and what we're trying to say with our story. And you can't possibly know everything there is to know about your story right out of the gate. You can't know what kind of epiphanies you'll have or what your mental state will be each day when you show up to write, or what kind of things are going to influence your story because you can't predict the future. And because of that, you can't expect perfection. Welcome to the Fiction Writing Made Easy podcast. My name is Savannah Gilbo, and I'm here to help you write a story that works. I want to prove to you that writing a novel doesn't have to be overwhelming. So each week, I'll bring you a brand new episode with simple, actionable, and step-by-step strategies that you can implement in your writing right away. So whether you're brand new to writing or more of a seasoned author looking to improve your craft, this podcast is for you. So pick up a pen and let's get started. In today's episode, we're going to talk about why so many novels go unfinished. And the reason I wanted to talk about this topic today is because I've had a lot of writers reach out to me recently who are somewhere in the messy middle of their first draft, and they're stuck in a spiral of doubt and overwhelm, and they're starting to question whether or not they should even bother getting to the end of their draft. And in most cases, the things these writers are worried about are things that they don't need to be worrying about at this stage in the game. As I like to say, they're borrowing problems from the future and using these problems to fuel their greatest fear that says they're not cut out to write a book. And as someone who coaches writers for a living, this bums me out. So in this episode, we're going to talk about a really important mindset shift that you need to make if you want to be the kind of writer who finishes drafts and gets published. And not to toot my own horn, but there's a reason why I've been able to help so many writers finish their books and go on to become published authors. And it's not just because I teach them new skills or new techniques. It's also because I help shift their mindset into something that's highly conducive to writing a story with as few roadblocks as possible. So that's what I'm going to help you with today. And with all that being said, let's go ahead and dive in. First, I want to ask you a question. Why do you think that so many novels go unfinished? And I really want you to think about this, so I'm going to be quiet for a second. Okay, here's what people normally come up with. A lot of people think that so many stories go unfinished because the idea wasn't very good, or so many novels go unfinished because the writer wasn't talented or didn't have what it takes to write a novel. The other thing I hear is that maybe the story is just too complicated or so different that it just becomes so difficult or that it's impossible to finish. But here's the thing. The number one reason why so many novels are never finished is because most writers expect to produce a first draft that's perfect, or at least really good. And then when it's not perfect or really good, they give up on writing their story altogether. And unfortunately, this is a belief in a standard that many writers have adopted to their own detriment. Because like I said, this is why so many novels go unfinished, like 97% of novels if you believe the statistics that are out there. Now, I want you to think about this for a minute. All of these novels that never get finished because the author deemed their first draft not perfect or not good enough, they probably compared their work in progress draft or their finished draft to finished works from published authors and found their stories lacking. But here's the thing. These are novels that could have been great if the author just hung in there and had the right mindset. These stories could have gone on to be published and could have impacted many, many readers' lives. They could have won awards or could have been adopted to the big screen or even turned into TV shows. I mean, who knows, right? And that's the thing. We will never know. So how do we avoid this? Well, I'd like to offer you a new mindset to adopt, and it's this. Trying to be a perfect writer or even a good writer and trying to write a perfect draft or even a good draft is an impossible task. You will never do it, at least not at first. In fact, expecting to write a perfect or even a good first draft is like expecting to go through your life without making any mistakes. It's like expecting a baby to start walking without ever falling down, or expecting to learn how to play the guitar without ever hitting a wrong note. It's like adopting a new puppy and expecting it to not pee in the house. It's just not realistic. And not only is it not realistic, but creativity is not a paint by numbers process. It's not even a linear process. And that's part of why you'll never be able to write a perfect first draft. Even if you outline your story in advance or follow one of the popular plotting methods like save the cat or the hero's journey, there's a process of discovery that needs to happen with every story that you set out to write. And that's because stories unfold and grow within us. So they change, they evolve in our minds as we get to know them more. And every day that we sit down to work on our stories, we learn a little bit more about our characters, the plot, the world, and what we're trying to say with our story. And you can't possibly know everything there is to know about your story right out of the gate. You can't know what kind of epiphanies you'll have or what your mental state will be each day when you show up to write, or what kind of things are going to influence your story because you can't predict the future. And because of that, you can't expect perfection. The moment that you put this expectation on yourself and your work, you've already set yourself up to fail. And that's because getting your draft perfect on the first try is never possible. And I'm even willing to say that writing a good, cohesive draft is rarely possible. I mean, I've seen it happen, but mostly it's because the author did a ton of work on their story up front before they wrote a single word. But for the most part, you're not going to be able to write a first draft that doesn't have any plot holes or inconsistencies. It's just not possible. And the problem is, too many people think or hope that they can write a perfect first draft. And even worse, they believe if they don't, then somehow that means they aren't good writers. So they expect perfection, and the moment they hit any kind of snag, they give up because they feel disappointed in themselves and in their story. And because of this, expecting to write a good story on the first try is the fastest way to fail. Now, here's a caveat. This doesn't mean that your first draft has to be a total disaster. You can write a more efficient, better quality first draft if you do some strategic thinking and planning up front. A few weeks ago, I did an episode about the 5 questions to ask yourself before writing a first draft. It's episode number 37, and I will link to that in the show notes for you. But it's by doing this kind of work up front that you can set yourself up to write the most efficient first draft possible, but it's still not going to be perfect. And that's because practice is what makes perfect, not first tries and not first drafts. So what does all this mean? Well, first of all, you need to shift your mindset and allow for things to be a bit messy. If you go into the drafting process knowing that you're just figuring things out and that whatever you come up with is going to require revisions, then it's going to be much easier for you to succeed. Now, let me tell you about something I see a lot of writers do that I really want you to avoid doing as you write your first draft. I want to make this as actionable as possible because I know it's sometimes hard to take all that mindset stuff and apply it to your work, right? So a lot of the writers I work with try to do too many things at once. They try to write and revise at the same time. They try to discover the story and perfect the story at the same time. And my advice is always to not do this. And that's because it's not possible to write and edit at the same time. If you try to do that, you're going to get trapped in a never-ending loop of rewriting and second-guessing, and you're never going to get to the end of your draft. If it helps, you can think about it this way. So, how can you perfect something that you haven't seen in its entirety? Or how can you decorate a cake and make it pretty and perfect if you haven't even finished baking it yet? And the answer is, of course, that you can't. You have to wait until you're all the way finished. And it's the same thing with writing. You have to get to know your story first. You have to get it all down on paper, and then you can worry about cleaning things up later. You can certainly do this with an outline or with one of those plotting methods I mentioned earlier, but you still need to allow that first draft to be about getting the story down first before you go back to revise. In fact, I encourage every writer that I work with to move through their first draft as quickly as possible. And yes, of course, we allow for corrections or for new ideas to pop up, but we rarely ever go backwards. Instead, we incorporate the changes or new ideas into the story as we move forward. And that's something that you can do too. So long story short, I want you to embrace the process. Know that your first draft is probably going to be a bit messy. Focus on getting the story down first so that you have something to revise later. And then when it's time to revise, you can worry about what's good, what can be improved upon, what goes in what order, and what you can keep and what you want to delete. Once you're finished, and only once you're finished, should you start the process of revising. And that's because the faster you can get in this mode of knowing things won't be perfect and getting the story down on paper before you revise, the more of an efficient and effective writer you will become. And I'll be honest, it's probably not going to feel very easy at first, but every day that you can practice these mindset shifts, they're going to be more ingrained in your mind and you won't have to think about them so much. So they'll just become a part of you and a part of how you approach the writing process. And if you're feeling a bit skeptical about all this, why not just try it out? I mean, if you're not making the kind of progress you'd like to be making, or if you're not finishing the drafts you start, then what do you really have to lose by trying this method out or by shifting your mindset so that you allow for the messiness and so that you can get to the end before ever stepping back to revise? I mean, worst case scenario, you'll end up kind of where you're at now, stuck, not really making forward progress. But best case scenario, something like this could really change your writing life for the better. And like I mentioned earlier, this is something that I use with all the writers I work with one-on-one, and I've seen it change lives firsthand. So just give it a try and see what happens. Now, let's do a quick recap before I let you go. Key point number 1 is that the reason why so many novels are never finished is because most writers expect to produce a first draft that's perfect. And then when it's not perfect, they give up on writing their story altogether. Key point number 2 is that the reason you can't write a perfect first draft is because creativity is not a linear process and it's not a paint by numbers process. Stories unfold over time, they grow and change as we get to know them better, and it's just all part of the discovery process. Key point number 3 is that your first draft is going to be messy and it will require revisions, but writing and revising at the same time is not the way to go. Not only is it inefficient, but if you try to do it, you're going to get trapped in a never-ending loop of rewriting and second-guessing, and you're probably never going to get to the end of your draft. Key point number 4 is that once you've finished with the draft, that's when it's time to revise. So at this stage, you'll be able to see your whole story, including what's working, what can be improved upon, what goes in what order, and what you can keep and what you want to delete. And lastly, key point number 5 is that the quicker you can get into this mode of understanding that things won't be perfect and getting the story down on paper before you revise, the more of an efficient and effective writer you will become. And that's how you go on to be the kind of writer who finishes drafts and gets their stories out into the world. So that's it for today's show. As always, I want to thank you so much for tuning in and showing your support. If you want to check out any of the links I mentioned in this episode, you can find them over at savannahgilbo.com/podcast. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe to the show because there's going to be another brand new episode coming out next week. If you're an Apple user, I'd really appreciate it if you took a few seconds to leave a quick rating and review. Your ratings and reviews tell iTunes that this is a podcast that's worth listening to. And in turn, that helps this show get in front of more fiction writers just like you. So that's it for today's show. I'll be back next week with a brand new episode. Until then, happy writing.